All right, so I guess we're moving on to our second little portion, which is my stuff. So I gave a little bit in part one of an introduction to who I am, but in this little part here, I'm going to talk a bit more of where I specialize and kind of how our innate knowingness leads our path in life. So I'm going to join this. And so I began my journey into Bodytalk in kind of an interesting way. I was a university student here at the U of S, and I was a varsity wrestler. I wrestled with the Huskies. And so I was studying kinesiology, and I was already underway being a personal trainer and doing exercise science, and had all my anatomy and physiology and good background that really helps me in helping the body to heal. But I ended up in a car accident in 2003, and I broke my arm. And so I wasn't able to train, and I had to find an alternate activity. And so my big philosophy is life is always going to keep redirecting you to your path if you're on your wrong path. And that car accident turned my life in a completely different direction. And because I was already being a personal trainer for the city of Saskatoon, I had the opportunity to take yoga fit training. And I had went in and then did my very first yoga class just after breaking my arm, and did that as my alternate activity. And so broken bones represent needing to really change our foundational beliefs in life. And so it moved me into this whole fun journey of yoga. And so it started off with fitness yoga, very much in line with the fitness stuff I was doing in those days. And so I took that yoga training, and then life threw me another curveball. My husband and I moved off to Regina, and things just ended up taking another curveball, and I ended up leaving and going off to South Korea to teach English as a second language, and I taught yoga and floor hockey in an English immersion camp. But during my time in South Korea, finding myself and moving on with things, I found my way into emotional freedom technique, which is that meridian tapping therapy, which in itself is built into Bodytalk in a lot of ways. And so with EFT, it's on the basis that there is a trigger and a response. So say you're afraid of a mouse, that's your trigger, and your response is fear. What they found is there's a measurable energetic disruption that causes that response. And so when you tap on the meridians, you clean up the energetic disruption, and then there's no more fear, there's no more pain, there's no more grief, there's no more whatever we're tapping through at that time. And it was such a tremendous tool that I had a coworker there that was versed in it, and I found an online summit. And in that journey, I had a week off, and because I had yoga school on the weekends, because I took more yoga training while I was in South Korea, that I went and spent Monday to Friday at a Buddhist temple in a silent meditation, which, let me tell you, was the most traumatic experience of my life. When you spend 5 days alone with yourself, and you realize how much you don't like yourself. And so that was really the big first step in my transformation, was going through that experience. And I happened to have an EFT session scheduled with a practitioner over Zoom the next day that I got back. And we actually had to look in the mirror and work through all of my self-love stuff at that time. And so that was the first big shift and transformation in my life. And it just snowballed from there. And so I began practicing EFT with my personal training clients to help them get through their blocks on their weight loss. And then I started teaching yoga for fertility, and we used EFT for that lots to get through that stuff. And in the clinic that I was running my yoga space and my little practice out of, there was a Bodytalker. And so I tried a Bodytalk session. And I said my first session wasn't overly, she didn't really explain anything, and I didn't really feel anything, but I had just had a miscarriage, and I was just pregnant with my first, as I'd gotten remarried after I came back from Korea. But all she said in that session was she could tell I had a loss. I'm like, okay, that was about it. It wasn't anything overly exciting. But the opportunity came up to take my training with Allison, who will be here to meet you guys soon. And I jumped into Bodytalk purely as a business move, not having any idea what it was or what it could do or anything. So that was how I got into Bodytalk. But it was mind blowing as I came in to do the training. You go through every area of the protocol chart and you learn through it and you heal through it multiple times. I was a space cadet. I didn't sleep for the first 2 days of the training because my mind was so blown. It's like, this is what I can do. And just the amazingness of it all. That one of our first things we learned is like our scar protocol of scars in our body. And I have this fun little scar here on the top of my foot that I got after I was done in South Korea. I spent a month studying yoga in Thailand with that resonance yoga I just taught you. And I did a U-turn on a scooter and dropped it on myself and ripped a big giant hole in my foot that got stitched back together. And it never healed. It had all this nerve pain and I had all these problems in it. And so my partner in training asked the yes, no question, scars, right foot. And she goes, do you have a scar on your right foot? I'm like, oh yeah. And so I took her right to it. And we had to release joy from it because I love studying this method of yoga and spiritualism in Thailand so much. And I wanted to go back so bad. My body didn't want to let go of it. And it was keeping it in my foot. And so as soon as we released the joy from that scar, my foot, it's hardly noticeable now, and all the nerve pain went away and it healed up properly. And so how our body stores our experiences and stores our emotions is a big part. So I'm a huge believer in that every experience we have is going to redirect your life on the path that you need it to be. And so fun things like car accidents and divorces and other things that don't work out so well always redirect you to where you're going. And so that was part of my journey into that. And as I moved into Bodytalk, every experience with every client is a new adventure, and I don't like monotony. I was always one to have 3 part-time jobs versus 1 full-time day job and needing to have that adventure. So Bodytalk just really provides that for me. And one of the areas I find with Bodytalk, and for people in general, when we're not happy in life, and Susan had mentioned it earlier, when we're not in flow with our life, then things are out of balance. And so if we're not on the path that we're supposed to be on, you're going to hit roadblocks. Things are going to stir things up and make things happen to redirect you to your path. And so if we're walking the right path, then we're in ease, we're in flow, and our body doesn't have to go through all of these different upsets and problems with it. And so in my life, I have a few other fun examples of that. And then I had taken that yoga training in Korea and Thailand before I came home. And on that journey, I got a plantar wart. And when I was really focused at going back to Thailand to take my yoga therapy training, they exploded and I had a whole bunch of them. And because I wasn't, going to Thailand with a 3-year-old wasn't really working out in my plans, that's why I ended up taking the Bodytalk training. And so it's like, okay, I got saved up. I was going to invest into myself with something. Let's go do this. And okay. And so I started walking that path. And every time, once I was really working with Bodytalk, every time I tried to take on new yoga classes or anything, I would get hurt. My body would just tell me, this is not what you need to do. And so it redirected me to closing my yoga studio that I'd had from 2010 to 2018. So yeah, I guess I had for about 8 years, had inside out therapies. And the day after I closed my yoga studio, my warts completely vanished. So my soul and my soul were telling me I was walking the wrong path. But nothing under the sun after 8, at that point it had been 12 years and nothing would get rid of those warts. And then as soon as I redirected my life to take Bodytalk as a full-time path, it got better. They just disappeared. And so we see that's our body is always trying to communicate with us, and our feet are around, the paths that we're walking. And so if you have feet stuff, you may want to look at where you're going. And so I find in my work, that is an area I work a lot with people, is trying to figure out what their life's path is, and helping them, get out of their own way so that they can follow it. A lot of the times it's fear, and a lot of times we think it's a fear of failure, but in 90% of the cases I work with, it's actually a fear of being in our own light. It's a fear of our potential. It's a fear of success. that's holding people back. And so that's always really amazing. And so we have that end of it. And so I always like to ask the question is, when you were a small child, when you were 4 or 5 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up? And I wanted to be a nurse. And then at points later in life, I thought I was going to be a paramedic. I guess there was always this part of me that knew I needed to help people heal. And Andy Early, a friend of one of our participants here, another fellow Bodytalk practitioner, she said she wanted to be a magician. And that's pretty close as well. And so I've heard other people in the spiritual healing pathways that wanted to be astronauts and work in that cosmos, in the cosmic field of things. And so, it may not be directly what you want to be, but there's usually a good hint within that. So, yeah. So that's always one of the fun things. Okay. So I have given a few, fun things of what have happened by practitioners, like the one that got through her lactose intolerance because of her journey in fetal life. Pregnancy, birth, and preconception work and fertility work is really a big passion of mine. But as I progress through my stages of parenthood, conscious parenting and helping parents to undo their own childhoods and their own baggage and their own buttons and triggers that they are carrying into their parenting, and are repeating those generational patterns is another area that I really love working with. And so one of the big stories I have with that one, in how it really has led me into doing the work that I do, is I ended up taking my training as an infant sleep educator. And so this is all about how babies are biologically wired to need to connect and have that attachment and have responsive care to create the foundation of their brain in their first 3 years of life. And so our modern parenting practices go completely against our anthropology and our biology, and how separation of a baby from us creates stress within their brains, within their nervous systems, which inhibit their wiring. And so an area I teach a lot in is emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, because for a lot of us, and my own story was that crying babies go to bed and you're in big emotions and you get put in them. You get put in a timeout, you get put away, and you don't get any consoling of your emotions. And what we know is the way we form our emotional intelligence is through co-regulation from an attuned adult. That every time they're there to help you and coach you through calming down your emotions, your nervous system learns how to do this process. There is no such thing as self-soothing. And that is one of the biggest myths that we have in particularly infant sleep, is that a baby can soothe themselves. They don't have the brain, prefrontal cortex, to do it. And so we're seeing so much issues of anxiety and depression and attention difficulties in children because their brains just didn't get that regulatory systems put into play due to separation. But the good thing is we can go back and fix those things. It just takes a lot more work. So I really like working in prevention with my prenatal students. And so the big thing that came up is Bodytalk will always tell us where we need to go and what our priority is. And as we ask for our permissions to move into the session, sometimes it'll tell us that we need to refer out to a different practitioner, that we need to go to the ER, which was the case when my son dislocated his elbow. Though he's such a calm, easy kid, I could, knew he was in distress, but it's like, nope, this is out of your scope. You need to take him in. And we get that knowledge. It took me to having to go see a naturopath in my early days. And I'm sure it was something I could have balanced out in myself, but it brought this huge awareness. I was asking my yes/no questions as I filled out the intake form, and it had me mark yes for depression. And as I said, first step in fixing a problem is recognize you have a problem. And at that point, I didn't realize that I was mild to moderately depressed. And when you're in it, and you've been in it for a lifetime, you don't realize what you're in until you come out of it. And it was like coming out of this fog. And so that was the first piece, is I got this awareness of like, okay, there's some depression here. Interesting. turns out I had adrenal fatigue and we needed to do some supplementation and such with the naturopath, and that was all good, but it was awakening. And not long after that, it took me to my fetal life experience of not really being wanted, which was not a surprise to me. I've always felt out of place in this world. I'm 5 and 7 years younger than my siblings, and I always knew I was just a big oops, that I wasn't supposed to exist, and how that impacted my own sense of self and how I fit into the world, the root chakra of my right to exist and my right to have was really out of balance. I ended up doing a lot of work with my root chakra. But from there, it actually took me back into another fetal life experience of my mom, of my conception story. And, my mom, and having conversations with her now about our generational trauma and the different things, was she was consciously resentful of having me. She wanted to leave my dad, and she wanted my siblings to be a little bit older, and that I added more years to her sentence, her actual words. And so I've always had this place in myself. And so working with pregnant people and small children and people at any age around their conception stories is really a big part of me, because as we work through that stuff, that depression just disappeared. Like it was like a light was turned on in my life. So that's why I really love doing work with fetal consciousness. And next month, I'm presenting at the International Birth Psychology Conference on how Bodytalk works to talking to babies in the womb, and how I actually talk to babies in the womb and help them through their fears and through their worries, and help them to heal their different things, and work with the epigenetics of the ancestral patterns and different traumas that are impacting them physically. So it's quite fun realm of work. And just in September, I supported 3 births, and so I really love doing birth work, because I can work with baby and I can just find out exactly what's going on with them, what kind of support they need, calm the mother's nervous system down, get them to relax. The last birth I supported locally here, the doula was just messaging me saying, hey, she's been pushing for an hour. I'm like, oh, okay, we need to do this. And I'm taking training in spinning babies on Tuesday, which is going to help me a little bit more, because when we have fetal positioning issues, when babies not face the wrong way, it really impedes your process to birth. But that those positioning issues are usually communication from the baby, that they need some support, or there's resistance to coming into the world. And I can basically help baby to let go of all those fears and disconnect from those stories that are no longer serving them. So prenatal work is my absolute favorite piece to do, and birth work in general as well. There's nothing more fun than that. Yeah. So any questions on that stuff so far from you guys?
How's your relationship with your mother now?
It's improving. Yeah, we're able to have more open, connected conversations and things, but that's really recognizing how I was playing out her same patterns with my own children. That's, I guess, the other part of the story, is that my mom had a lot of trauma in her own life, and she doesn't deal well with people's problems. And so if you have a problem, it's just pushed aside. And so the things that I've had in my life, I just knew I couldn't talk to her about them, and I just didn't. And so as my oldest got to be an age where he started to, not be the cuddly, cute little baby that you could just connect with all the time, and started to be a toddler that would push your buttons and trigger you, that I started having lots of power struggles with him and all these problems, and I didn't know how to cope. And then it was timeouts. It was like you have to rein that kid in, or he's going to be a psychopath from my family. And even taking to spanking him a couple of times, and really disconnecting that attachment relationship, which just made things worse. It made him cry out for my attention even more. And so what we know when we're having behavior issues with children is that there's a need that they're trying to communicate. And I couldn't connect or feel my own emotions at that point. I didn't know what was going on. I was so disconnected, and I couldn't connect with them. And so it was a lot of work on working on myself, of being able to feel and connect and be the mom that he needed me to be. And I got to a point that my child's behavior was so different that my sister asked me if I medicated him. Like, it was noticeable. And so in the work I do with parenting is that our children are always a mirror of our own stuff. And the best way you can always help them is doing your own work and working on yourself. And same thing with your partners. As much as we want to fix them all the time, it's continuing to do the work on ourselves all the time. And that's the same thing with the world as a whole, like our compassion meditation we did and other things, is the more work we do on becoming a clear mirror and not getting our buttons pushed and working through those active memories and those triggers and letting go of that stuff so that we can be calm, cool, and collected and not escalate things, then things aren't going to escalate around us. Yeah. Yeah, so that was one of the other stories, was Taryn's behavior stuff. Parenting self? Yeah. Yeah, so emotional intelligence, I had mentioned, is an area that I work a lot with from my infant sleep stuff. And that for the majority of us, we got to a point where we don't really know what we're feeling. And with that is our body's like a big backpack of our experiences, those active memories, those intrinsic experiences. They're all built up with us. So I always like to say, you think of a small little child, they run and jump and play all day, and then they never get sore. They're just perfect, right? But as we get older, our body starts to creak and groan, and things come out of alignment, and we end up with postural things and stuff. That's our experiences getting stuck in our tissues. And so even from the massage therapy and the yoga standpoint, we know our experiences get held into the body. In yoga, I'll be working with someone in a big hip opener and they'll start laughing or crying. That those emotions like really get stuck in kind of the fascial tissue. And so as we get older, that stuff builds up and builds up and builds up. And so one of the things people commonly see as we get older is we start to gain weight. And that's because our body has nowhere else to put our emotions and experiences they haven't processed fully. And it just has to stick them somewhere so it creates more space for our emotions and experiences. And so we've found some pretty good success in dealing with weight loss through Bodytalk as well, because we just need to release the emotional stuff. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about that with Susan with the lymphatic drainage, of kind of moving some of that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so basically, I always say with Bodytalk, it is any age, any issue. Bodytalk will bring it, and we never know how they relate. Someone will come in and see me with back pain, and it'll tell us the agenda for our session is to address the back pain, but we spend the whole session working on the relationship issues, and then the back pain goes away, even though we didn't actually address the back. And so that's the one real beauty of the Bodytalk system is we're not a clock. We can't just take it apart and fix one piece and put it back together, that we're connected to our environment, we're connected to the people around us, we're connected to everything, and it all plays together, and we don't know where and what it begins and ends, that everything is so connected. And as you'd heard with Susan when she was like basically crying through talking about her sons, and how that was physically showing up in her body. And that's how it is. And I'm pretty sure my next stuff is still relationship stuff based on my mom, and that my mom wanted to leave my dad, and that my grandmother was trapped in a horrible relationship with 12 children on the farm and couldn't leave. And I have generational trauma of bad marriages. And so something in my life has been telling me that no matter how many times I've tried to leave the marriage, not in the second marriage with kids, that everything just keeps telling me I have to stay in it, and I have to work through it and just keep doing the work on myself, and it just keeps getting better and better and better, and that I have to heal that generational trauma and not pass it on to my kids and be able to show them what a functional interdependence looks like. So definitely not fun. I wish I could just leave majority of the time. But, you know, we have our soul's journey. We have our stuff that we need to work on and heal. And it's like sometimes it'd just be so much easier to not do the work, right? Just turn on the TV and ignore it all. But yeah,
That's what we're here for.
that's
right?
what we're here for. Yeah, and so that's the beauty of the spiritual work. And even as we heard from Joanne a little bit later, and how it all relates, and how it all connects. Yeah, but you know, I could tell stories about the things I do for hours. But yeah, no, it's just to be able to help people heal and work through their stuff and get, yeah, and make that your life. It's just such an amazing thing that it's just such a joy to make Bodytalk. That's such an unknown modality, despite having over 20 practitioners just in Saskatoon alone. That, you know, at the expo a couple weeks ago, most people said they had heard of it at one point or another now from someone. So it's getting to be around now.
How long is the course?
Your fundamentals, your first level is a 4-day intensive, and then you take them in modules. So it's pretty accessible. And there's actually our Bodytalk Access training as well, which is just like a little like 1-day course to teach you some balancing tools just to do on yourself without having to do the full practitioner training. And then there's also Bodytalk for plants and Bodytalk for animals, that any living creature can be helped with Bodytalk. So if anyone wants help with their plants, our friend Andy Early is the one to talk to. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty neat, and so that's why I'm quite excited for my presentation with in the Birth Psychology Network and these practitioners that were already working at the level of consciousness of the fetus, that give them an insight into how these tools can be used and to heal, and that what we know that all of our problems in society of violence and disconnection and mental health and addiction all stems from our earliest childhood experiences and how our brain was wired. And so how we can prevent all of these big problems through attuned, responsive parenting. And a big part of what I do with that is helping the parents to be able to do that by working through their own baggage. So, yeah. Anything else?
Do you have to be kind of, I'm not a feeler, I'm kind of more of a knower.
Yeah.
So I'm a homeopath, and I was thinking about doing Bodytalk because sometimes in homeopathy it's hard to find the right remedy. And then this would be a more succinct way of getting to the answer. Then I could use the remedy.
Yes, exactly. So for someone who's a homeopath already, so we have Bodytalkers that come from all different walks of life. We've got nurses, the girl that trained with me at the same time, she had a commerce degree in marketing, like nothing healing based at all. Susan was just a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter, but the people that already have a specialty, the last thing on our protocol chart is other modalities, and you get to bring that in. And so with me, let's say my fetal positioning, the spinning babies work, I go in, it's like, okay, it takes me to that. I ask through, there's 23 different techniques. Okay, we want technique number 5. And so I was like, okay, this is what we need to do. And so you knowing what you know already, it will just enhance your practice so much. And one of my favorite colleagues here in the city, Miriam, is a physiotherapist. And so working with my next stuff, yeah, she's like fine tuning like specifics, like, so it's really amazing when we have the specialties already and how you can integrate the two together. So absolutely.
One thing, if I could interject, that intuition isn't something that's learned, it's inherent. And what clouds it is just the belief that you're not able to access it.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you release that belief, then your intuition comes back.
And that's the same thing with like the resonance yoga and the connections through the chakras, is everybody can feel them, but we just are so out of practice and out of touch a lot of the time that it just takes some practice. And so that's the fun thing of the structured intuition of Bodytalk is it teaches you some really good ways of doing it. And Bodytalk also has a class called Mindscape under its umbrella, and it teaches you to create this workshop in your brain in which you can bring people in and heal them within it, and you can actually get into the Akashic records. You create a library so you can access all of that knowledge in it. You can do so much within it, similar to the solo mind control method as well. But within that class, one thing is you do is you're given a name of someone you don't know, and you bring them in and you're able just to tell them exactly who that person is and what they are without knowing anything about them. So it just really teaches you how you're able to get that information. It's like I work with people all around the world, and all I have is where they are and what their name is. And it'll tell me, that they have asthma, and it'll tell me that they have this and this and this and this without ever being told any of it. And so it's just so amazing that we have that interconnection and that knowledge. As I shift here, they can shift there. And that basically it's all around this whole web of consciousness of it all. All right, any other questions? All right, so if you guys online have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and I can answer them beyond. Thank you.